Not so fast. Today, I want to talk to you and break down the habit of fasting. And I say habit because most of us aren't treating it as a practice, which is where historically it comes from. Fasting is a diet trend that comes up. It kind of just always lives now. There's people who cling to it like it is their thing. But fasting originally was a religious and a medical practice. If you go back to, obviously, any religion has some sort of fasting built into their practices. Islam, Buddhism, Hinduism, they all use fasting. Christianity, obviously, Jesus talks about fasting a lot. Fasting is regular in the Old Testament as the Israelites deal with different things that require them to be drawn nearer to God, or to focus on God, or to discern something more deeply that they can't handle the distraction that is digestion. And that's what fasting was supposed to be. And then as medicine and science started to develop, people started to realize that fasting and not eating would help solve some illnesses. Because if you think about when you're really sick, your body shuts off its appetite. That's why you don't want to eat when you're sick. And it is because your body is saying eating and digestion takes way too much energy. And so if we want to focus on rebuilding the body, getting rid of this disease, getting rid of these cells that are getting rid of this disease, getting rid of this infection or this virus within your cells, your body is saying, we're going to focus on that, which means you need to not eat so that we don't have to spend energy trying to process that part of the body. So that is why your body naturally goes into a period of quote unquote fasting when you are sick. And so they started sort of giving that to patients who needed to heal from certain things. And fasting, again, if you're not eating, your body's not spending that energy. It's also not building up the waste trying to digest all of that, which reduces inflammation. And when you can reduce inflammation, you can reduce immune deficiencies or viruses, problems that are impacting your health. And so that's where fasting was supposed to be used. This modern fasting as a diet trend is not what it is supposed to be. If you think about hunter-gatherers or cavemen, when you go way back when, they went long periods of time without food because, unlike us, they didn't have a grocery store where they could just go buy things. They had to hunt and find and seek. And if they didn't hunt and find and seek, they just didn't eat. And they were okay because they just lowered their energy expenditure based on not having an input. Today, we just eat and eat and eat, and we oftentimes don't match the output. And one interesting thing that will come up is, so you think about humans doing that, animals still have these long periods of fasting where they lower energy output and they just don't eat. We call it hibernation. But as I was reading this, we really mistake bears because only small animals actually quote unquote hibernate, where they're kind of in this deeper sleep and they don't wake up as often. Bears go into a state, bears and skunks, and there was one other animal, they go into a state of torpor is what it's called, and it's a version of hibernation, but they actually can wake up if they need to. So if you were to walk up on a bear in the winter, they're able to wake up and attack you. Like, I think as kids we think of hibernation as like they're just knocked out for winter, but they're not. They're aware and they can wake up. They would just rather not, because since they're not eating, they don't have the energy to do that as efficiently as they would when they were eating during the spring or during the fall. So the state of torpor is really interesting in bears. I'll get back onto the fasting, but this is crazy. Bears don't eat or drink. They're kind of in a deep rest. Hibernation torpor isn't really even like sleep, because they described it as sometimes they even have to wake up from the hibernation to go to sleep because they get in such a deep state of just rest. Their heart rate drops, their temperature drops, all because they're not having to deal with digesting food. It's a beautiful thing. But bears specifically convert their pee. They don't go to the restroom while they're hibernating or in this torpor state. So they convert their pee back into protein and rebuild it in their body, which is just wild. I don't even want to understand the science of that, but I want you to have that in your back pocket in case it ever gets asked to you on a game show, or you just need a random fact one day and now you know what bears do when they don't go to the bathroom during torpor. Back on to fasting. Perhaps this evolutionary story that is written by looking back at hunter-gatherers, or even just slightly less modern than we are today, where people had times of scarcity, even seasonal scarcity. So in the spring, you had all these fruits and vegetables and things to eat. In the winter, you were more locked into just what you stored up, which meant things that could be preserved, things that could last, like rice, potatoes, starches, meats that you could freeze and preserve with salt. So if you think about it, there's this natural scarcity period that is built in through our seasons even. And we just totally ignored that, because I can go get fake strawberries in the winter and they taste the same, they're actually bigger, but they're not real, you know? Like, you're not getting bright red strawberries in December. It's something else. So I just think naturally the inclination of our human is that we can go back to just implementing a little bit of scarcity at different times, even if it's just not fasting entirely, not because we have no food, but fasting from things periodically when they're not as readily available, like fruits and vegetables in the winter. Just changing it up like you used to have to. We don't have to change anymore. We are kind of just given whatever we want when we want it, and you can probably get it freely delivered to your door if you pay for some sort of subscription. This idea that we can return fasting to that natural state that it was religiously, that it was historically, is just introducing the fact of you might have to go without for a little bit and you'll be okay. Your body will adapt to that state of being lacking of something. It is written for us to sort of switch between feasting and fasting, and all we get to do now is just feast. Animals still adjust to the seasons and the food availability, but we do not. So if you look at the benefits of fasting, because yes, it's a religious practice, it's a historic medicine practice, those are what it was created and what it was labeled to be. But it does have health benefits. So let's go over a couple of those. The first one is probably the one that most people seek the most, is it adjusts and regulates your insulin and your leptin sensitivity back to baseline. So fasting is the most effective way to lower your insulin levels and improve insulin sensitivity. Insulin is responsible for energy utilization and storage. All foods raise it. Whenever you eat, you're going to get a rise in insulin, but we know that carbohydrates, especially refined carbs like oats or cereals, they spike it really strongly. That is why a low carbohydrate diet is usually what they tell people to do when they are trying to reverse conditions that are insulin resistant, like type 2 diabetes, or if you're just obese, they're going to say eat low carb, because we want to fix that insulin spike that is happening every time you eat because of what you're eating. However, even some proteins, this was another thing that I just learned, even some processed proteins that aren't necessarily natural can cause just as much of a spike to your insulin as carbohydrates. And this one's hard for me because I do really like whey protein. I love a good protein coffee or a protein smoothie or protein pancakes or my protein ninja creamies. But as I read a little bit, whey protein, because of the way it's processed and how it's broken down, it can actually spike your blood sugar and spike your insulin just as much as a carb, just as much as a sugary bowl of cereal can. And as hard as that is for me to handle, it doesn't mean that I can never have whey. It doesn't mean that you can never have a carb that is going to be fastly digested and give you that fast energy only to have the crash later. It just means we have to be more intentional about when we eat them. If you're going to have a whey protein shake, have it around a workout so that those carbs are fueling the work that you did. Don't probably have a whey ninja creamy when you're going to bed, because it's going to spike your insulin and spike your body to go, oh, we gotta digest this right now, and use it right now. And then you're not really winding down. So that's a little off the track of fasting, but all of this is to say that we have to just be more intentional with the diet decisions we're making. Don't just do them because they're trendy. Think about why you're doing them. So as you think about your insulin being brought down, it also brings down your leptin sensitivity. The body can either use glucose as a fuel source or burn fat. The free fatty acids start getting separated in your blood, and when you don't run on glucose, when you go without carbs for a little bit, it starts using those fatty acids, and your ketone bodies go up. That's why it's called a keto diet. A low carb diet allows your body to switch. It hits the flip, it flips the switch to go from using carbs as energy to using fat as energy. And as it uses those fatty acids, when your insulin levels are high, for example, a diet habitually high in carbohydrates, it is very difficult for your body to switch to using that fat. If you have carbs available, your body's going to use them first because they're easier to convert to energy. The fat is harder to convert to energy. It's slower to convert to energy. So when you are demanding it to do stuff, your body's going to go to carbs first. It's only going to use fat when there aren't any carbs stored up. During a fast glycogen store, these need to be used up, which can take up to 36 hours because fully switching to burning to fat can take almost 2 whole days in some people. Ketosis, that stage of being all using on fat for energy, reaches a plateau after 4 days of fasting, by which time 75% of the brain's energy is being supplied by ketones. So right there, if you're using fasting to burn fat, odds are you're definitely not doing it long enough. If you aren't fasting for at least 3 days with no carbs, or it could be a keto diet, but still no carbs, meaning literally none. As soon as you have a carb, it flips the switch back. So you have to go almost 4 days with not a grain of rice before you tap into that ketosis for most people. And then your brain can have all the benefits of running on ketosis, but odds are you'll also feel disgusting because you have no energy for that time period until your body starts adapting to being in ketosis. You're going to feel disgusting. So insulin regulation and leptin regulation, which leptin is just a hormone that helps raise the other hormones to control hunger and satiation. So it'll either tell you you're satiated, it'll tell you you're not satiated, it'll tell you that you have some GLP-1 and some ghrelin, and it'll say you're hungry, you're not hungry. That's kind of what leptin helps with. Both of those, by fasting, can be reset to their baseline, meaning that they're sensitive again. As you eat a ton of carbs, your insulin becomes just always stimulated, and it forgets what it's supposed to be like in homeostasis. That is what fasting does. It returns it to its normal. Fasting also helps with appetite regulation. How hungry we feel depends on a complex interplay of hormones, environmental cues, psychological traits, and social conditioning. Fasting, if done right, can curb the appetite and subsequently lead to better appetite regulation. Ketones, the same ketones that I said happen when you start flipping the switch to running on fat, not carbs, produced during fasting, are not on a regular calorie restricted diet. Actually, they reduce appetite, even if you're eating, but you're just not eating carbs. However, if done without knowledge and wise precautions, fasting can actually make your hunger hormones spike and actually make you more hungry. Ghrelin, made primarily in the stomach, signals the brain that we need to eat. Production peaks 4 hours after a meal, but it also has its own circadian rhythm, being lowest in the morning and highest in the afternoon. When a meal is skipped, peak levels associated with meal times fall away again fairly rapidly, and during a longer fast, being 24 or 48 hours, production of ghrelin gradually falls away after the second day. Just meaning that when you decide to fast, that's why you get hungry in like the first 3 hours and you forget you're fasting and you go eat. If you can make it to like the 24-hour mark, you'll actually notice you're less hungry because that ghrelin is now like, oh, I can just chill. I don't need to be used. This in part explains why a prolonged fast for most people finds that hunger comes in waves in the first 2 or 3 days and then it goes away. It also explains why that skipping breakfast it's really easy for people because the ghrelin works on its natural circadian rhythm. So if you say you're fasting just because you're skipping breakfast, that's kind of a cheat because you just don't have the hunger hormone in the morning. So you're not actually getting any of the resiliency from fasting that you would get if you actually skipped a meal later in the day. Leptin, we already talked about, signals the brain to physiologically say it's satiated. Leptins are produced by adipocytes and the fat cells that primarily compose adipose tissue. In obesity, alongside insulin, resistance there is high leptin level and low satiating because leptin resistance. When leptin levels rapidly drop during fasting, it should improve leptin sensitivity and therefore appetite regulation. The most important part of fasting that people think they're getting, they're probably not, is the cell recycling or the cleaning. This is called autophagy. Autophagy is what a lot of people think they're getting when they fast. You're not. You're not doing it long enough. When the body switches to using ketones, remember, after like 36 to 48 hours with no carbs, once you do that, then your body switches to running on fat, and this is where it's able to start recycling the old cells into new cells. Autophagy literally means in Greek, it's like to devour oneself, and that is what is happening. Your cells are kind of forming a layer around them. They're combining with some vesicles, and then they're just eating themselves. The old ones are getting eaten by new ones, and they're getting restructured into better ones, basically. Recycling the old cells into new cells and cleaning out the old stuff that doesn't work anymore. This is regulated by inhibition of the mTOR signaling pathway. Intermittent fasting activates the signaling pathway and inhibits the mTOR activity, which in turn activates autophagy. This only begins to happen, however, once all your glucose stores have been depleted and insulin levels begin to drop. Intermittent fasting also produces protein synthesis and utilizes and leads to a recycling of proteins, which is another mechanism for maintaining lean body mass, not just losing muscle, but losing the fat. So, autophagy is a beautiful thing if you actually get there. It starts to be able to take the gross cells that need to go and actually just make them new again in your body, which is a beautiful thing. But odds are most people aren't able to not eat carbs long enough to actually get to that stage of autophagy. Perhaps the most, and this is the key benefit to fasting, and it's the mental clarity. That's what most people say, is they just have a mental clarity when they fast in the morning and they don't eat until lunch. And I too love this sometimes. If I have a day where I really need to lock in at work, not eating breakfast is so crucial because then my body is not having the blood sugar spikes. It's not having the energy spike and crash. It's actually just locked in. And the reason for that is that ketone production is up. As the body depletes its immediate glucose stores, it switches to burning fat and producing ketones like BHB, which serve as an efficient fuel source for your neurons. Blood sugar stability from skipping the meal avoids the sharp glucose spikes and subsequent crashes that often cause post-meal fatigue and brain fog. Hormonal response, fasting can cause mild adaptive increases in alertness, chemicals like norepinephrine and dopamine. So if you can think about what's happening when you eat a bowl of oatmeal, you're eating that oatmeal, blood sugar is spiking above your baseline. So you were at baseline, so you were chilling. And as it goes above baseline, you get this like false confidence that you have that much energy for the day. And since oats are pretty fast digesting, within the hour, it sometimes comes back below baseline or at least to baseline. And that's why you feel groggy after you have a high carb breakfast. And that's why you get that brain fog and you need that 2 o'clock nap because your carbs have now, it's not like you actually got more tired, but that false energy that you had from the meal is gone. So now you're living on what you had beforehand, and that's usually bad sleep for most people. So that is why, those are the reasons why fasting is good. That is what it's doing to your body. And now that you know that, let's talk about the types of fasting. There's not a one size fits all, and people do whatever the heck they want with fasting, which is okay. People do partial fast, meaning they just skip one meal and spend time doing something else during that one meal, which is great. It's not really fasting, so maybe you just call that calorie restriction. Time restricted eating means that people eat only during a certain window. So maybe you only eat from 12 to 8. Again, that's just restricted calories. A complete fast is no food for 24 hours. They just eat water. And that's what I would consider kind of actually fasting. But again, in case you haven't noticed, the reason people lose weight when they're fasting is just because they're not eating a meal. So that brings me to the next point is if you're going to do the time restricted eating, the whole point of fasting is that you are giving your body and your mind a break. You are not giving your body or your mind a break if you are just eating the same 3 meals you would every other day, but now you're doing it within a 4-hour period. That's like saying, I have to run 60 miles this week. I'm just going to go run 60 miles today, and then I don't have to run the rest of the week. Could I do that? Yes. Would it feel good? No. And am I getting any benefits of the recovery? No, because I still did the same amount of volume. I just did it all crammed in. If you want to use fasting to lose weight, don't call it fasting. Call it calorie restriction, and then actually restrict your calories. Because if you are still eating the same amount of calories, it doesn't matter if you're doing it in a 4-hour period, you're still not losing weight. And now, I would also argue there's a fourth type of fasting that's kind of non-food fasting. So do a social media fast. Do a exercise fast. Do a TV fast. Do a sugar fast. Whatever fasting, again, is not about food. It's not. It is about bringing yourself closer to God. Or if you're not Christian, it's about just recentering your mind on the things that actually matter and removing the distractions of things like food and social media and TV and sugar that just hype you up because they're a dopamine hit and they're not actually giving you any long-term benefits. Now that you know what fasting sort of does in your body, we know the different types of fasting, let's talk about what fasting looks like. Let's kind of put those physiological and those biological factors within a time period. So in the first early fasting phases, meaning 0 to 12 hours, your blood sugar drops slightly after your last meal. Your pancreas gets less insulin because no more food is coming in, and your body starts to use the stored sugar, meaning the carbohydrates that are stored in your cells, and your liver processes them into quick energy. In hours 12 to 24, this is where you can start to run out of sugar. So your liver runs out of sugar, your insulin drops to very low levels, your fat cells start releasing stored sugar or stored fat into the blood, and the liver can start turning this fat into ketones for the body and the brain fuel. And 24 hours to 48 hours is where that deep repair could happen, meaning you tap into autophagy and your cells start to clean out the old and broken parts. Your human growth hormone increases to allow you to keep your muscles safe. Inflammation in the body goes down, waste goes down, and energy levels can rise as fat burning becomes steady. So, what is fasting not? It is not a fat loss strategy, because that is just calorie restriction. If you are using fasting as a means to just restrict your calories, call it a diet, call it a deficit. Don't call it fasting, because it's not. Fasting is also not a punishment device. It is not something you decide to do on a Wednesday after a Tuesday night of eating way too much sugar and way too much crap. Fasting is a way to realign your priorities with something that provides true satisfaction. It is a way to fix your gut, because if you think about it, fasting is the ultimate elimination diet. You are cutting out everything. And if you start reintroducing food after that in the correct way, it could be a beautiful way to figure out things that just inflame you. Common things that just bother people because their bodies don't digest it are eggs, dairy, gluten. If you really want to know if those things are causing you to be bloated, then a fasting for 2 to 3 days could be a great way to do that, and then reintroduce things one at a time so that you know exactly what is causing the reaction. But fasting should always be short-term, not long-term. And if you're going to do it long-term, even beyond a day, you have to match the energy output with the fact that you're not having an input. Because if not, you'll have so many problems with hormones and your body breaking down, and that's where bone density starts to drop Because if you're not doing fasting as a means to draw closer to God, to recenter your mind, you're not fasting, you're just starving yourself. You're not growing, you're just hungry. And that's sort of the point I want to close with, is just, if you are thinking about fasting, if you are a person who does fast, I want you to ask yourself some questions. The first one is, ask, why are you fasting? If you're just trying intermittent fasting or whatever to see if it changes anything for you, that's fine, but it's better to have some goals, such as improving your sleep, such as better digestion, such as discerning something that you haven't had the time to devote to. So then maybe you can now reallocate that time you would spend cooking and eating, which for some people is like 3 hours a day. You can now spend those 3 hours a day in prayer, a 3 hour a day in journaling. You can spend that time you would normally spend with a fork in your mouth, and you can think about it worshiping God. Just finding a way to, if you're facing something really hard and you just can't find the time or the energy or the mental clarity to think about it, that is what fasting is for. It is for discernment. It is for drawing nearer to an answer, preferably somebody else's answer being Yahweh. But whatever it be, do it that way. If you are fasting because you want to change in body composition, that's really not it. So set a goal for why you are fasting, or just have a good reason. If you don't know why, it makes it harder to adjust the plan because you won't have anything to measure afterwards. If you're fasting without God or prayer or focus or sacrifice, you're just hungry. That's the power of fasting. It's not about food. It's about emptying something so that God can fill it. It's about creating space to hear from Him, surrender distractions, and focus your heart, not creating space in your waistband on your pants. Biblical fasting is about presence, not performance. It's about worship, not weight loss. So no, fasting isn't about manipulating your metabolism or getting shredded for summer or your wedding. It's about intentionally laying something down, being food, being social media, so that you can seek more of the good thing, which is God. The second thing you should do is, so you ask yourself why you're fasting, and then you prepare for the fast. You don't want to just do a fast all willy-nilly, because it will never go well and you'll never feel rejuvenated afterwards. One of the benefits of fasting is that a greater focus on timing can include a pivot away from unhealthy food and things that you've fallen into eating mindlessly. Like at late night, if you're going to say, I'm just not going to eat at 8 p.m., from 8 p.m. to noon, whatever it be, it honestly takes out that hardest time of the day where your ghrelin is high, you're really hungry, and now you can't eat because you set a rule, which again, this is just restricting calories, not necessarily fasting, but it is strategic because it is cutting out the time of day where people most often eat bad things. If you're simply moving those so not healthy choices earlier in the day, or you're like, okay, I normally eat 6 meals a day, what if I just eat those 6 meals within a 4-hour period? That's not giving you any benefit. So to plan a fast, you want to first plan good foods to eat in that time period that you are eating, and then you want to plan your energy output. Again, those hibernating animals are not eating, and they're also not moving. So if you're going to fast, don't plan your 20-mile run on a day that you're fasting. That doesn't make sense. It literally doesn't make any sense. So if you're having to ask yourself the question of like, can I work out while I fast? How do I hit my protein 1 gram per day if I fast? Then you're not doing it for the right reason. That's your answer right there. If those are the kind of questions you're asking going into a fast, your motives are wrong. You're trying to lose weight, not draw closer to God. You're fasting for weight loss, not for any growth, spiritually, mentally, physically. The third thing to ask is, when are you going to fast? So most people do just say they're going to skip breakfast and they feel better at work. I think that's true for the mental clarity. However, then you are cramming a majority of your calories into the later part of the day. And as a person who is really good at capitalizing on sleep, not really, but I did get like 7 days of 80s last week, killer. But as a person who knows I have to eat earlier in the day, I actually would prefer somebody fasting to say, I'm going to eat a high protein breakfast and I'm going to eat lunch, and then maybe you skip dinner, which means that you still use that sleeping period as adding on to your fasting period, but instead you're also just setting yourself up for a great recovery sleep, lots of REM sleep, because if you're not trying to digest food late in the day, your body temp can drop, just like those hibernated animals. Your heart rate can drop and you can chill. So if you're going to try to play with a daily fasting time, I would say skip the last meal of your day, not the first meal of your day, because the first meal of your day, again, is just cheating because your ghrelin is low. So you're not hungry anyway. That's why it's easy to skip breakfast. So I would also say, on top of changing the time period for your daily fast, try to do a 24-hour fast every once in a while. Just when it's convenient for your energy output, when you have something you need to work through. A 24-hour fast is super good. It helps adjust your cortisol. It helps adjust all those other things we're doing. It helps fix your ghrelin adaptation, and just helps your sleep. You'll always sleep good on your first day of a fast because your body's just like, wow, this is what peace is like. So do that. The last thing that you should do when you're thinking about fasting is prepare for coming off of the fast. So we talked about having clean foods if you're going to just do intermittent fasting, so that you're not just cramming in junk calories and not actually making any progress on a fast. The other thing is that when you come off a fast, you gotta reintroduce good things. The goal of the fast was to fix your skewed appetite, to fix your insulin response, to fix your sugar addiction, to fix your hormone levels. If you accomplish this, meaning that you had a successful fast for long enough, if you just go back to eating sugar, your spikes are going to be worse and they're just going to go right back to where you were before. If you were eating the exact same way that you started the fast, your fast did nothing. Longer fasts, also, if you do a 2 to 3 day fast, you're going to shut off your digestive system, which means that your body's not going to want to just digest a 4-course meal when you come back and you're super hungry and you just start devouring food. So the best way to break a fast, which is why we call it breakfast, is a small portion of hydrating, easily digestible food, low in sugar, fat, and heavy fiber. For short intermittent fasts, meaning under 24 hours, a light meal of lean protein, healthy fats, and cooked vegetables works well. For extended fasts, you might even just want to start with bone broth because your body, again, forgot what solid food was. So what to eat first? Try bone broth, try lean proteins, try vegetables that aren't super high in fiber, and avoid all sugary foods, heavy carbs, greasy meals, large portions, things that your body forgot existed while you were chilling and figuring your life out on that Zen fasting. So basically, just today, my goal was to help you discern why you're fasting, if you're a person who actually should be fasting, which if you're a person with any sort of eating disorder past, odds are you shouldn't be because it's probably coming from an unhealthy place. But before you start your new weekly fasting routine or plan a day to restrict in order to make up a binge, just remember, fasting wasn't designed to be a diet trend. It was designed to be an act of removing the distractions of digestion so that you can lose your hunger pains for God, not the water weight you put on after that night snack. I always think back to a couple weeks ago, my pastor said something about how often are we actually longing for God. And I think about that every day. Every day, people's stomachs growl for food. But nobody's actually longing. Nobody's stomach is rarely growling because they need time with God. And that's a problem. So if you're going to use fasting, use it as a means to make yourself hungry for God again. Hungry to be just with Him, free of distractions of digestion. Fasting isn't a leaning out strategy. It's a leaning in strategy to the presence of God and figuring your life out with Him. Or if you're not a Christian, just figuring your life out, period, with a lower body temperature and a stomach that is clean of all the crap we normally eat. And with that, feel free to do a fast. Just do it the right way. Starve the lies, not your body. Build your body, fortify your mind, stay hungry, stay unsatisfied. See you guys.